Our next speaker is Karen, so please.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's wonderful to have you as a co-panelist, and I cannot top the turkey story. It's priceless. Glenn, you showed your stripes as moderator by securing a podium. Secretary Mineta, you had too much podium. We had no podium, so I think we're now at a happy podium medium. It is a particular delight, Secretary Mineta, Senator Inaugural, to have you here for this session, and I just want to thank you both for your incredible service to this country. We all have benefited so much from it. Irene, thank you so much for the invitation, and kudos to your wonderful staff. It was a pleasure to work with them. And it's really a delight to be here for your first annual conference. And I hope that there might be some lessons that are applicable from the history of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. You see how much is in a name, and our name is always confusing to people. Some people think it's a German organization, but then we have that of the United States. And it has really to do with the history of the organization. And what I want to do is tell you a brief story in 3 chapters. One is the history and background of GMF. The second is how we've grown over the period of our history. And the third chapter is what are the lessons that might be useful for you in thinking about where the U.S.-Japan Council goes from here. First, just briefly on the history. GMF was established in 1972 as a permanent memorial to Marshall Plan assistance. The then Chancellor of West Germany, Willy Brandt, wanted to come up with an idea of how he could say thank you to the United States for Marshall Plan assistance on the 25th anniversary of then Secretary of State George Marshall having gone to Harvard University and giving the speech announcing the Marshall Plan. So Brandt went to Harvard in 1972 and gave a speech announcing the creation of the German Marshall Fund. It was an incredibly generous gift on the part of West Germany. The agreement was that our president will always be an American and our board is all American. So it was a gift with no strings attached. And that original 150 million Deutschmarks was part of what is today our endowment. That gift was renewed by the German government 2 additional times, and we are lucky today to be an endowed organization. When GMF was set up, it was conceived very much as a foundation, and we had 2 primary activities in 1972 and in the next 2 decades. One was a grant-making function. The idea was that GMF wasn't going to be the hegemon on the U.S.-German or U.S.-European stage. And I should make clear that when Brandt announced the creation of GMF, his vision was that we would not only work in Germany, but rather across the entire European continent. Now, that was not possible in 1972, given the Cold War, so we worked in Western Europe, but it was only with the end of the Cold War that GMF extended its reach across the continent. But that was very much a part of the vision in '72. So we had 2 primary activities. One is the grant-making activity, giving funds to others, working on transatlantic relations, and the other was really a networking function. It was a fellowship program that starting in '82 brought Europeans to the U.S., and then much later in '99 started sending Americans to Europe. And the idea was to pick young professionals who would have a bright future in their countries across a whole range of fields. I'm happy to say we have our first member of the U.S. House of Representatives who's an alum of this program. We have lots of people on the European side, the Portuguese Prime Minister, we have 4 Danish cabinet ministers scattered throughout the continent. So our selection committees have done very well. And I should point out, we don't select these people. We have selection committees in each of the countries. And I think that's also important. So that really was what GMF did for the first 20, 25 years of its history. Then, over the past decade, GMF has grown dramatically. And this is really the second chapter of my presentation, is how is it that we've changed? Certainly the growth is visible in our size, the number of staff that we have, the number of offices. For most of our history, we had our headquarters in Washington and we had 1 office in Europe. And that was originally in Bonn, today it's in Berlin. We now have 6 offices in Europe. So there's the office in Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Ankara. So we really are continent-wide. And then we have 3 small representations in Bratislava, Turin, Italy, and Stockholm, Sweden. So you can see the reach of GMF today. Obviously, our budget has also changed. We used to be a $10 million organization. We now have a $30 million budget. The size of our endowment really hasn't changed. In fact, it's gotten smaller over the past 2 years, as I think all of us are feeling in our personal finances as well as any endowed institutions. So the way we've grown has been by partnering with others. In the case of GMF, those others typically are foundations or governments. We have very limited corporate funding and really no wealthy individuals who contribute to us. So that makeup is somewhat different than other organizations. And our programming has also changed. Whereas we had 2 major programming areas, grant making and networking or fellowships, what we've added over the past 2 years are 2 additional pillars. One of those is a research pillar. And the argument there was, if we want to start working in new areas, we need to have the expertise to do that. So let's bring on board fellows who can give us the intellectual capital to work in new areas. So that's a part of the research cone, is in-house fellows. And another piece of it is products. We conduct a public opinion survey that we just released last week. So Glenn, that's why it was hard to get a hold of. We were releasing that new public opinion survey. We've been doing it now since 2002. We ask a series of questions, the same questions of Americans and Europeans in 12 countries on foreign policy. We have another survey that we do on immigration. But it's a wonderful discussion tool. We at GMF are not trying to interpret those survey results. We're trying to present them to people who are interested in the transatlantic relationship and have it be a basis for discussion. Happy to talk about the results of that survey, but I won't do that right now. So there's a research pillar. And then the final pillar that is really grown over time is the convening pillar. And we now have 2 signature conferences a year. One takes place in Brussels each spring. It's called Brussels Forum, and it brings together a very impressive group of Americans and Europeans to talk about the issues that matter in the relationship. We've been lucky to have a distinguished congressional delegation every year. We've had senior official representatives there, and we wanted to do it in Brussels because, if we're honest, it's much harder to get American officials to Europe than it is to get Europeans here. And we wanted to show the Europeans that we were going to bring senior Americans there to engage in this discussion. We did it for the 5th time this year, so I think we've now got a little bit of expertise under our feet, and I think it will continue to grow. It's different than the APEC annual conference in that we don't want it to be big. We keep it limited to 350 people, and that is a real challenge because each year when you do it and people say, ooh, this is good, I want to be there, you have to say no to a lot of people. So we're not a membership organization, so we're trying to reach a different set with that conference. Our second signature conference is something that we do in the fall. We'll do it the first weekend in November, right after the midterm elections, and we'll have again a senior congressional delegation led by Senators McCain and Udall, and it focuses on defense issues. And this was an outgrowth of Brussels Forum. One of the senior officials who had come every year, he came initially as Canada's foreign minister, and then he became Canada's defense minister. And the first year he was there, a conversation was taking place about the transatlantic relationship, and he had his hand up the whole time. And finally, the moderator called on him. And he said, I'm Canada's foreign minister. First, I'm just happy to be recognized. And second, no one has mentioned Canada in this entire conversation. Let me remind you what we contribute. Fast forward to last year's Brussels Forum, conversation about Afghanistan. One of the folks speaking was the Swedish Foreign Minister, Carl Bildt, who made a comment about how it's only the Americans and the Brits who were doing the fighting in Afghanistan. Someone else on the panel said, well, don't forget the Dutch, the Canadians. And this gentleman said, well, Canada, that's just an extension of the United States.